What is truth? That was the rhetorical question by Pontius Pilate when he was facing truth itself. And yet that's going to be the basic challenge before us all. How do we really know what's true? We take that so for granted, and yet there are tools and there's a science of understanding truth. How do we know the Bible is true? That's perhaps the most crucial question among us. We're going to approach this in a rather unorthodox manner. We're going to start by talking about the boundaries of our reality. How do you examine them? How do you qualify sources of information? And how do you test hypotheses to find out whether they're true or not? There are standard tools that we need to be aware of to do these things. Well, our challenges before us, of course, first of all, deal with our skeptical environment that we find ourselves in. We have attacks on every side for the very existence of truth. We live in a society that espouses value relativism. You have your truth, I have mine, which is utter nonsense in terms of denying the existence of absolute truth. And this, of course, is accompanied with attacks on the Bible itself, the fountain of truth for mankind, the very basis of our heritage. And, of course, attacks on the Lord himself. Now, this is all in a background of cosmic warfare. We understand from the scripture that we are faced with spiritual adversaries that deal with the principal weapons of deceit and doubt. That was Satan's first move in the Garden of Eden, to ask the question, yea, hath God said? Raising doubts that God really said what he said. And that strategy echoes throughout the centuries and is very, very extant in our civilization today. So how do we know the Bible's true? You know, there are testimonies from the past. There are scholastic evidences, manuscript evidence. We could go through all the different translations and authentications of the manuscripts. We can also deal with the testimony of contemporary eyewitnesses at the time. And this is the traditional approach to dealing with defending the Bible, its veracity, its truthfulness, and so forth. We're not going to spend much time on that because that tends to be scholastic, tends to be academic, tends to be a little distant from where you and I really live. And so we're going to focus more intensely on testimonies from the present. We're going to explore the very boundaries of what we think of as reality itself before we go any further. We're going to talk a little bit about the lessons of modern science. It's really quite astonishing to realize how the discoveries of modern science of just the last century or so have totally altered our understanding of the reality that we live in. We're going to talk, strangely enough, about messages from outside the boundaries of our reality. Messages that actually have their origin that are extraterrestrial, outside the space-time you and I inhabit. And we'll talk also about some hidden discoveries in the biblical text itself that may surprise you. It's this last area that we're going to focus on most intensely. But we're doing all this in the advent of a very popular book, The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Very readable novel, very cleverly crafted. And yet, although it masquerades as a novel, it confronts the reader with a fact sheet up front with 3 paragraphs claiming that these things in the paragraphs are true and accurate when they're not. They're deliberate deceptions and not accidental misunderstandings, a deliberate attempt to deceive and confuse and disrupt the faithful. That book, of course, has given rise to a whole cottage industry of rebuttals, books that attack the various premises and misinformation that pervades Dan Brown's colorful but blasphemous novel. And Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code, heralded by the press as a compelling blend of history and page-turning suspense, a masterpiece that should be mandatory reading, says the Library Journal. An exhaustively researched page-turner by Publishers Weekly. Astonishing, because it's full of misinformation and twists of history. And to make matters even worse, is the subject of a major blockbuster movie by Ron Howard by the same name. So it is very much launching a tsunami of sorts across our culture, raising questions, certainly feeding the skeptical and confusing the marginally faithful, and should be challenging those of us that take the Bible seriously to really understand its origins and its foundation. While all this is going on, the National Geographic wants to get into the exploitation here. In their May issue of 2006, they have a feature article on the Judas Gospel, and obviously exploiting, as the best they can, the groundswell from the Da Vinci movie, which is being released that same month. The National Geographic has a very slick presentation, very skillfully designed to undermine traditional biblical beliefs. And the Gospel of Judas, which is the subject, was discovered back in the 70s. It was known and refuted by Irenaeus back in 180 AD. It's not new news, and it's certainly not historical, but it's among those documents that are used by people who don't really know their Bible to confuse. Mel Gibson did a movie called The Passion. His reviews were a little different than Dan Brown's. The New Republic said a repulsive, masochistic fantasy, a sacred snuff film, they called it. Courting bigotry in the name of sanctity, according to the New York Times. A real nutcase whose ulterior motive was making money, according to 60 Minutes. You know something strange going on here? Why is the Passion excoriated and the Da Vinci Code extolled? Why are Gibson's motives denounced and Brown's dignified? You see something upside down here? Why is Christ's Passion regarded as a repulsive, masochistic fantasy, and the supposed marriage between Mary Magdalene touted as researched material fact? Nothing could be further from the truth. So these are attacks, of course, from the pagan left, very organized, very sinister, and possibly very much motivated supernaturally. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, of course, is one of these things. The National Geographic, following right on its tail, is another we're witnessing. The Jesus Seminar, an astonishing array of pseudo-experts who exchange subjective, speculative hunches, replacing serious scholarship. Peter Jennings' TV special. You never find out the real motives behind that. The History Channel, the banned books of the Bible. Hugh Schoenfield, many years ago, back in '66, the Passover plot, that this was all some kind of scheme. And The Last Temptation of Christ in 1960, and on it goes. Even Mel Gibson's phenomenal movie fails to communicate just who Jesus Christ really is. And that is the crux of the whole issue in the first place. So what's going on here? Political correctness in an increasingly secular culture, or even something more sinister? A reversal of values. Fiction is promoted as fact, and fact, even the deity of Jesus Christ, is passed off capriciously as mere fiction. Even the undeniable grandeur of the creation itself is attributed to the randomness of a cosmic accident in our schools and in our culture. How astonishing, how distant this is from any real grasp of reality. Well, the traditional defenses of scholarship, of course, by pastors and others, would get into the manuscript evidence, talk about the incredible implications of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We could talk about advanced documentary technologies, the scanning laser microscope and such things that have brought earlier dating to the most important manuscripts, dated contemporaneously with the events they record, and the fact that we have contemporary eyewitnesses in which none of them, not one of them, recanted, even though they suffered torturous deaths. Very, very compelling evidences, but we're not going to focus on that traditional approach. We're going to go a little different way. By the way, advanced technology was to the rescue. A scanning laser microscope can differentiate between 20 micrometers of the papyrus, measuring the height and depth of ink, as well as the angle of the stylus used by the scribe. They can even tell whether he's right or left